Girly Girl Style, and recently I put a poll out there to all of you and asked what kind of content did you want to see? If you're brand new here, I am an online reseller. I typically do a lot of reseller related content, but during quarantine it's been a little bit challenging. I can't get out sourcing the way that I used to. I can't do thrift hauls. So there's been a lot of challenges involved in my content delivery to all of you. And then I started thinking about, what are some of the things that I'm really good at? What are things that I just do that I don't even think is a big deal? And a lot of that has to do with DIY. So growing up without a lot of money, I have been upcycling clothing since as long as I can remember, probably as long as I've been thrifting, right? So as an online reseller, we typically go outsourcing when we can. And we pick up items, we find items, but we sometimes leave items behind that are not quite right. They're not quite trendy. They're not quite perfect or what you're looking for. And as someone who is an avid Goodwill outlet shopper, and if you don't know the Goodwill outlet, you can pick up items by the pound. You'll get home with items and you'll find like a stain or you'll find something not quite what you thought it was. And instead of just donating those back and contributing back to all of the clothing going to the landfills each year, there are many things that you can do with those items. So because of feedback from all of you, I have decided to start sharing with you some different DIY projects that I do on a regular basis. There's going to be a lot of different projects throughout this video series. As you have suggestions for me, I will incorporate those as well. Hopefully you'll suggest things that I've never done, and that's always fun when you try something brand new, because sometimes you fail, sometimes you find ways to incorporate it into your own daily routine or weekly routine or whatever that may be. So anyway, there are a number of projects that we are going to cover in this series, but the first project I'm going to cover is actually a pretty simple project. So if you ever have purchased a pair of a pair of sweatpants or a pair of lightweight denim, lightweight pants, and maybe they're a little too short, maybe they're a little too long, maybe they don't quite fit the way you want them to, and you want to make a simple adjustment. So this adjustment that I'm going to talk about has to do with converting to a jogger. So joggers are all the rage right now. They are all the rage among all different types of people, whether you're sporty or not sporty. They're just a really cool fit because it kind of harkens back to the 90s with the peg leg jeans. If you know what that is, hello. Right here. But it's just a really cool way to modernize something that might be a little outdated. And so, for example, I actually pulled these out of my husband's drawer just a little bit ago. I was looking for something to utilize, and unfortunately, I don't have much in my closet because most of my jeans are, I don't have very many because the jeans I do have, I like the way they fit. And if I don't like them, then I sell them. But I picked these up, I'm pretty sure at the Goodwill outlet, and they're super cool. I mean, they're like this moto style. They have some distressing. They're super fun. He doesn't really wear a lot of black or gray denim, but he likes them. He's just very super tall, like super tall. Not super tall. He's 6 feet tall, which I guess is kind of standard, but he's 6 feet tall, and these are a little too short, I think, for him. And when you're taller, if you make something a jogger, it actually creates this illusion that they fit a little bit better. So he started wearing a lot of jogger style, and they have been very flattering on him. And the other cool thing is that he and I wear the same size in bottoms. So I am going to convert this pair of lightweight denim. It just has the standard little hem down here, the seam down here. It is the hem. Standard hem down here, and we're going to convert these two joggers together today. So let's walk through those steps. And again, if you have any suggestions for any upcoming DIY projects that you want me to cover, then make sure you pop those down in the comments. So let's get started.
Let's start with the tools. So number one, you're going to need to have some elastic. So in this elastic, I'm using 1 inch elastic. I know that some people like to use a little bit thicker, but honestly, for what we're doing, I think 1 inch works really well for most materials. I actually got this for a really good price on Amazon, and I will pop that up on the screen here so you can see. I'll also link it below, that way you can see it was just a really good price. I did have to buy it in this giant roll, but I feel like that'll last me probably the rest of the year. You'll also need to have some pins so that you can pin your item up while you are sewing. You'll need to have a pair of really good scissors. So make sure you have some really sharp scissors. These are pretty dirty, but they do the job. A way to mark your elastic, because you're gonna wanna make sure that it fits around your ankle pretty comfortably. And then also you have your needle and thread. And I will tell you, you can use a sewing machine, which I probably will do as well, but this to me makes life so much easier when sewing the elastic.
So the last thing you're gonna need is the item of clothing, obviously, that you wanna make into joggers. So make sure that you have that available at your fingertips. And one last thing you'll need, the iron and ironing board. I will tell you, this is one of those underutilized tools, especially if you are a DIYer. You need to get yourself a really good iron because this will help make your life so much easier. Now I am going to hand sew the elastic, and that's because on my sewing machine, which is right over there, she doesn't work really well. I don't have the right foot? I don't have the right presser foot to actually do a zigzag stitch to make the elastic work the way it should. So I like to hand stitch. Now here's a little tip for you with hand stitching. Something that I was taught when I was probably like 10 years old, and it has stuck with me forever. So a lot of times if you're brand new to hand sewing, you may be unsure how to actually finish off the end. And you do want to tie a knot, and you don't want to take both ends and tie it like we're taught to tie shoes. That's not how you do this. So you take your thread. So right here you can see that it is double through. So I've already threaded the needle, and then you have a little bit down here. I do with 2 threads with this, so thickness of 2 threads. And then I lick my fingers. And I know you don't have to lick your fingers. That's like, Bill's laughing at me. But I lick my fingers because it works well. Put your fingers on, and then you're gonna wrap it around once, right? And now that it's wrapped around once, you just twist and pull back at the same time. Take your middle finger and pull down. And then you immediately have a knot in the end. Now that is something that you have to practice to get right. And the reason I do lick my hands is because you do need to have a little bit of a traction. If you have wax, that probably would work just as well. But anyway, that's how you get that little knot. So once you have that done, you take your little elastic. Hi, Lil, you wanna come say hi to everybody? Come here, come here. Yeah, you wanna come say hi? She's making an appearance. Lily says hello. You wanna lick my thread for me? No? Thank you. I love you too. Okay, back to work. So then, you thread or you fold over. So obviously I've already stitched this one together, but you fold it over, and you do wanna leave a little bit of a seam allowance. And in this case, I probably do 1/4, maybe 1/8 of a seam allowance. So you want it to be on top of each other. And then you're gonna stick your needle in, and you're just gonna go back and forth a bunch of times. And so, especially if you're hand stitching this, and that's what's really cool about a lot of these projects, you can do them by hand. So you don't have to have fancy tools, you don't have to spend a lot of money, you can just use your little fingers, or big fingers, or whatever size fingers you have. So anyway, you're just gonna continue to stitch up and down, up and down, up and down, until when you pull it, you notice that it's not gonna come apart. So that's the most important part. And then you'll cut off your thread, and then now you'll have your little bands. And so I have 2 of my bands here, and this is what we're going to put at the base of our jean. And now we're gonna bring those jeans over, and we're going to press them with the iron, and I'll tell you why. All right, so I have the jeans right here. Now, first thing you always wanna do, turn them inside out, because you are not going to stitch them right side out, you're going to stitch them inside out. So you should just get in that state immediately. So then once you have them turned inside out, and there's your seam right there. So now what you can do is you can actually stick your elastic on like this just to gauge how much space you're actually going to need. Now, you already know how much, right? It's an inch, but you also need to have a little bit more seam allowance because you don't want to stitch into the elastic on the bottom. So whether you're hand stitching, machine stitching, it doesn't matter. You just need to make sure that there's enough space there that when you stitch, you do not catch the elastic. You know, some people might like to catch the elastic, but I do not because that impacts the way that it works. So I know that there's an inch there. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna actually cuff it, right? I'm cuffing it inside out. And now that I have this cuff, I know it's hard to see because it is black, but now that I have this cuff, you can see that that inch is gonna fit pretty well right here. And then I'm gonna press it. And so I'm gonna take the handy little iron here. And again, I don't, you know, we've had this Sunbeam iron forever. I don't know if I would say that this is like really great quality, but it definitely works. So I definitely have used it a lot recently. So you're just gonna press down on both sides. So you're gonna do the same thing with the other side. And you do want them to match because if not, you're gonna have one leg longer than the other. And we want this to look, you know, like it was made this way. So you'll just hold them up together, make sure that they do line up. And you can get really exact with this. I mean, you can go through and take your tape measure and ensure that everything is exactly the same. And that is great as well, because this is gonna be, you know, not that perfect. It's gonna be black thread on black. It's gonna be fine. I don't need to go too much detail. That's the other thing to keep in mind is that when you're picking out the thread color that you use, I showed you earlier there was a white thread that I used for the elastic. Obviously that's not important because the elastic is going to be hidden. But because these are dark denim, we're gonna make sure that we use the darker thread. All right, and I know that not all of you have access to a sewing machine. So I am gonna actually do this project by hand. There's also something just, you know, amazing about doing something by hand. That's why I love embroidery projects, because you're in there with your own fingers and you're making your own work and it's super cool. Don't get me wrong, I love her. She definitely is a trooper and she helps me immensely, but we're gonna do this project by hand. So I wanna show you that trick one more time with the thread. This time we have our black thread. You know, it's a little harder to see. There we go. I'm gonna lick my fingers, both of them together, twist around. Okay, let me do that again so you can see it on the screen. Twist around, and then you just pull your finger back. Take your middle finger and pull down. That's it. That's all. That's all.
That's not good.
All right, so now we have our thread. We're gonna take the elastic that we put together and then we're gonna put it on the jean. So just like this. Now if you have to roll or take that seam like that and then just kind of shimmy it up into there, that is great. We've already pressed it so we know where the seam is going to lay. We also wanna make sure the elastic is flat all the way around. Okay, and it is going to buckle a little because we do want this to be stretchy, right? So you'll see when you expand it, it's great. And then this is where the pins can come in. So I am a fan of using pins when you need to. I don't use them all the time, but if you pin in a few places, you can prevent it from moving. So all I'm doing is just pinning this elastic in place. And this is how I do my needles. So that way it's easy to pull out, whether you're hand stitching or using a machine. We're just gonna do that all the way around. All right, so I've pinned pretty much all the way around. I'm not gonna go all the way just because I do wanna leave room for a little bit of that wiggle room there. And then I'm ready to take my needle. Now, another tip when you are hand sewing is you never want that knot. We don't want that knot just flailing around. So you never want to start with the knot on top. So if you go under, see, I'm going under where the seam is and you pull through, now the knot is hidden and you don't have to worry about catching it or getting it stuck on anything. Now for this type of item, you're just gonna do a simple stitch. So just all the way around, super simple. I would make them very small because you do want this to be strong. And then as you're doing this, just remember, you don't want to catch the elastic. So if you have to use your thumb to push that elastic down a little bit, go for it. We may end up going through this another time. You also want to make sure that the stitches line up. You don't want to have anything all out of alignment, because that will definitely make it look like you did this by hand. And the whole point of this is to customize it and make it look like something you would want to wear, not something that you just found somewhere else. Okay, so now I have made it all the way around, and then you'll want to, before you finish it off, you do want to just double check. So you could flip it inside out and just make sure that it looks pretty secure. And if there's any areas that you feel like you might have missed, like, so I can see how this one right here is kind of missing a little stitch, I'll probably go back and add one there just so that it looks uniform, because I think that that's important. We can always go back and do that at the end too. So to close off the stitch, so a couple of ways you can close off a stitch. And again, I am going to encourage you to go under here, because if it's out here, now you have this seam just hanging out. So go back under. So now you're under that little lip. And then the way that I was taught is just to close it off by stitching around and around on the exact same spot, like 4 or 5 times. And that seems to seal the stitch pretty well. Sometimes, depending on what I'm doing, I might actually take it like this and then pull it through to make a knot. But most times you can just stitch and stitch and stitch and it'll be okay. And then of course you're going to cut that off. Okay, so one leg down, and now we're gonna do the same thing to the other side. So now we're gonna do one more press on the bottom, and then we're gonna flip them right side out. This is the final look. I'm gonna have Bill put these on though, because they're a little too big for me in the top, but look how they turned out. Yeah. All right, so that's our tutorial on how to turn your pants into joggers by hand, I might add. If you like this content, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And again, in the comments, let me know if there's any other DIY projects you want to see, any tips and tricks on. We will have a number of them coming out shortly over the next few weeks. Go into a little bit on the bleaching, making bell bottoms. That's a fun one that I just did. So we will have many more coming along the way soon. So thank you so much for joining, everybody. And until next time, see ya!